Just some guy talking, and I wanted to do a follow up to my last video. If you haven't seen it, please feel free to go back and watch it, but it's not really necessary. I talked about some strategies that I use to interact with people with whom I have significant disagreements on topics or issues that I am passionate about. And I don't know that I made my points completely. And so I wanted to come back around specifically to the part of the conversation that deals with the instances where you can't avoid a confrontation or you can't avoid the sensitive conversations, right? Either because you just feel that passionately about what you believe that you have to say it, or because you really feel like the other person needs to be educated, or because they set you off by saying something and you just feel like you have to address it, right? So, what do you do when you can't just kind of exist in this space where you have commonalities and common ground, but you've been pushed into this place where there's conflict? And I thought a lot about this, about what it is that I do, what I think. And I think it comes down to what's your goal? And that's funny to me because in another life, I studied theater. And so you can make your jokes here in your mind on the comments, wherever you'd like. But one of the stereotypical things about an actor is that whole what's my motivation question, right? So, like, why am I saying this? You know, I don't want to say the line. Why do I walk into this room? What is my motivation? And it's funny when you look at it from the perspective of an actor, but it's also really helpful in life, and particularly in these kinds of situations when you are in that conversation, when you're walking into that conversation, if you have planned beforehand to have it, what is your goal? And I'll tell you what most people, the way that most people act, what that the goal seems to be, right? The goal for a lot of us seems to be that we want to go into this conversation with all our facts, data, one-liners, zingers, etc., whatever we feel like we can apply to, knock the other person's argument out. Um, and it essentially is us wanting to go in and snort a line of righteous indignation, right? Just go in there and mainline some anger, some justifiable anger, so that we can get fired up and feel good, like I've said it. And then we walk away, but there's nothing accomplished other than you getting that adrenaline rush, right? That feeling of like, yeah, like I did it, like it felt so good. I finally had the conversation with so and so that I've been waiting to have. So if that's the goal, to make yourself feel fired up, then you probably already have that down. Like I don't have anything to teach you there. You just probably know how to do it naturally because that's what we do naturally. But if the motivation, if the goal is to actually educate somebody or to move them, however slightly, away from some significantly misguided, at least in your opinion, maybe actually in reality, a perspective that they have, then you can't go in there like that. The way that we typically approach those conversations is actually counterproductive to that goal, if in fact that's what the goal is. You really do have to go into it aware that there are things that you will typically say in support of your argument that will set the other person off. In my last video, I said that there were tripwires and landmines that we had set up in our lives or in our minds, that if somebody, touches those, sets them off, things blow up. And when that happens, the conversation is effectively over, right? people will still keep talking. You might still keep talking, but the dialogue is done. So at that point, when you trip that trigger, that person will no longer hear what you are saying at all, even if they were predisposed to listen at the beginning, which they probably weren't. So what do? So you go in and you try to figure out where they are. If you don't already know what their triggers and tripwires are, then take the time to identify it. If I told you that you were standing in front of a field that had a bunch of landmines in it, and you absolutely felt the need to get us from the side that you're on to the other, I guarantee you wouldn't just run across. You would step carefully. You would try to identify, like, okay, what does a landmine even look like? Like, I don't want to step, here, and like, what, like all these different factors will play into your mind about how you progress through that very sort of dangerous, volatile situation. But our conversations with people on these sensitive topics are exactly the same thing, and we just go, screw it, I want to be on the other side of this field, and I'm just going to go through. And then we're like, holy crap, like this whole thing blew up. Like, why'd that happen? Like, because there were landmines. Like, you knew that. You should have known that. If you didn't, now you know. Next time, don't run through the field. Take your steps carefully. Listen, factor in what the person's reactions are. Because if the goal is to get to some sort of progression away from a stance that that person has towards one that is perhaps healthier or better or more correct morally or factually, then you don't want to have a, you know combustion. You don't want to have an explosive event. It just doesn't accomplish that goal. Again, going back to what I said before, if that is the goal, then fine, you know how to do it. Just run in there and say whatever you want. Use all the same words that you always use. That person is going to get mad, and use the words that they use that make you mad, and then the two of you guys will just talk at and over each other and walk away from it. And the only thing that's going to happen is that your perspective of what somebody who is on that side is like will be confirmed, reaffirmed, and vice versa. That person will also look at you and go, I knew, like, he is such a insert type of person here. She acts just like all other quote unquote do. And again, if you're fine with that, then do it however you want. But if you want to actually move a conversation forward, then you have to approach it from a different perspective. Again, let's put it in a different context. If I'm approaching a strange dog, and I'm not trying to say that people are like dogs, but in a lot of ways we are, right? So there's some parallels here. But if you're approaching a strange dog, you don't run up to it and go, "Oh God, like, hey, doggy, yeah," because that dog might freak the crap out. You go up and remember all the things that people told you. Was put out your hand, palm up. Let the dog sniff you. Speak in a calm voice. Don't act aggressive. Don't charge to like people were like, yeah, just what, punch him in the face. And ultimately, that's kind of how these conversations play out. It's like we're, you know, we don't approach with caution. We don't approach with any kind of deliberation. We don't think about how we will react to certain responses ahead of time. We don't try to think about things that we may have read, if we even have ever taken the time to read about communication strategies, and ways to engage in an adversarial, potentially contentious conversation. We just run up and do the equivalent of punching somebody in the face, and think about what would happen if somebody did that to you. If somebody came up to you and just right off the bat started pressing your buttons and pulling all the wrong levers and, just, triggering you, how would you react? I don't think you probably have to look too far back in your memory to remember a time that somebody did that to you. If somebody comes up and just starts stomping on your hot buttons, we have just a natural inclination to respond aggressively. In fact, there are studies that show that we respond to that. We respond to somebody disagreeing with us or challenging us like that as if it were an existential threat. It kicks in the fight or flight mentality in our mind and or instinct in our mind, and we respond as if they were physically attacking us, as if they were threatening our life. That is the reaction. That is the adrenaline rush that you get, is that like, I got to protect myself. So if that happens to you, you have to expect that that's going to happen to somebody else. And I go back to where I started and say, what is your motivation? Are you trying to engage this person frankly? Are you trying to engage this person honestly and with not with disingenuous intentions, right? If are you trying to move the ball forward? In my last video, I said I don't expect to say something that's going to change somebody's mind, but that does not mean that I don't try to at least plant a seed in them, that in their mind, that might actually help them doubt a little bit that their perspective is 100% correct. That doesn't mean that I don't try to navigate these conversations towards a goal that I feel is important. And that's the part I think that I missed in the last. I feel like maybe I came off like I was saying, just don't worry about it. You know, don't get hung up on your differences. I mean, people have differences. That's the way that we are. That's why being human is awesome, is because everybody is different. Even people who are in the same group are different. And in interacting with those differences, there is a potential for enrichment. There's a potential for progression and improvement in us and in our perspectives and in our opinions. And if I am approaching a conversation with somebody who has an ideological difference from the perspective of enriching their life with an alternate point of view, even if I try not to be patronizing about it and say, well, I'm going to show them the right way. If I just want to show them another way with the hopes that this might actually improve their perspective, then I will approach it from a different stance than if I'm going in there simply to get my rocks off by saying a lot of really potentially witty, but definitely snarky and, stuff that will make me feel better about, from an emotional rush perspective, but has no regards for what that actually will do to the other person, and whether or not that will help them, and in some cases, whether or not that will be destructive to them. So, again, I encourage you that to consider this when you are in a situation where you do not feel like you can avoid a difficult conversation. Going back to earlier videos, remember, this person is a person who has their own experiences, their own um, perspectives that they've brought to whatever opinion that they have. And you need to be respectful of that, even if you don't respect the perspective, if that makes sense. Um, you need to approach it from the perspective of, I cannot probably change this person's mind in this sitting. And then finally, how do I make sure that this conversation is productive, is beneficial for both of us. That's the way that you move this stuff along. That's the way that you interact. That's the way that you get to move things towards the truth, and the truth isn't always on your side. You're not always representing the truth, but if you approach it from that perspective, guess what happens? You also get to like have a little bit more of an open mind to the ways that you might actually be wrong and be able to fine tune your perspective. I don't know if I've done a better job of, clarifying that. Maybe I've just muddied the waters, and that's ironic because this whole thing is about communication. So I'll stop there. I'm sure that I'm going to come back to this at some point because it's so important. But for now, I'm going to sign off. This is just some guy talking, and I will catch you the next time.